Have you ever sat at a red light with no traffic coming in any direction, waited the full cycle, and found yourself watching the sequence of colors with slightly more attention than usual? Red holds. Then amber appears briefly. Then green. You pull away. You have performed this sequence thousands of times without once wondering where it came from or why those three colors and not any others. Why not blue for stop and white for go? Why does amber exist at all? And why does red specifically mean stop, when red in almost every other context simply means danger or warning rather than a complete cessation of movement? These feel like questions with obvious answers until you try to produce one. The colors are so universal, so embedded in driving from the first lesson, that most people assume they were designed for roads. Chosen deliberately by some committee of early traffic engineers who sat down and decided that red, amber, and green were the most logical combination for regulating vehicle movement at junctions. They were not designed for roads, they were not chosen by traffic engineers, and the sequence that controls the movement of over 1 billion vehicles every day on every continent was already a century old before the first petrol engine turned a wheel on a public road. Today, we're tracing where this color sequence actually came from, why red had already claimed the meaning stop long before there were cars to stop, and how a system designed to prevent Victorian locomotives from colliding in the dark ended up embedded in the visual language of every road junction on Earth. But here's the surprising truth. The red, amber, green sequence was inherited almost unchanged from the railway signaling systems of the mid-19th century. And the reason red means stop has nothing to do with psychology or visibility or any deliberate design choice about roads. It means stop because of a dye that a Lancashire mill town happened to produce in abundance, and a railway company that needed a color which wouldn't fade in rain. To understand this, you have to go back to Britain in the 1830s and 40s, when the railway network was expanding at a pace that infrastructure and safety practices could not keep up with. Early railways had no standardized system for communicating with train drivers on moving locomotives. Station staff waved flags, held up lanterns, or used hand signals, each company with its own conventions, and each driver interpreting them according to personal experience. The results were predictable. Trains ran through stations at speed when they should have stopped. Trains on the same track collided because neither driver had received a clear warning. A major collision near Paddington in 1840 caused widespread public alarm and forced the railway companies to accept that informal signaling had to be replaced with something standardized and unambiguous. The solution adopted across British railways through the 1840s and 50s was a three-color system based on lanterns visible at night and colored boards or arms during the day. Red meant stop. Green meant proceed with caution. White meant proceed freely. The choice of red for danger was not arbitrary, but its origin is more mundane than most people would expect. Red dye, specifically a deep crimson produced from natural sources available cheaply in the textile districts of northern England, was the most color-fast option available. Applied to signal lenses and boards, it faded the least in sustained rain and direct sunlight. It was chosen partly for practical durability, and partly because it was already associated with danger on military flags and warning notices. The association between red and stop, now so deeply embedded that it seems like a law of nature, began as a procurement decision. Think of it like choosing the color of a warning sign not because red means danger in some universal human language, but because the red paint was the most weatherproof, the most available, and the least likely to be confused with the surrounding landscape at distance. The meaning followed the material rather than the other way around. The original three-color system had a weakness that revealed itself almost immediately. White, The clear signal, meaning proceed freely, was easily confused with any other uncolored light source. A lamp in a nearby building, a lantern on a cart, a star on the horizon at a particular angle. Train drivers advanced on white signals that turned out to be something else entirely. The most catastrophic example occurred in 1876 near Abbots Ripton in Cambridgeshire, where a mail train passed a signal that the driver interpreted as white and ran into a stationary goods train, with a following express then colliding with the wreckage. The inquiry found that ice had obscured the red glass on the signal lamp, and the driver had mistaken the faint remaining glow for a white proceed signal. White was removed from the railway signaling system and replaced with green for proceed, pushing the caution meaning to a new amber designation. The sequence that resulted, red for stop, amber for caution, green for proceed, was the direct product of a fatal accident and a parliamentary inquiry, not of any deliberate color theory. So, if railway signaling had already resolved this question by the late 19th century, why did early road traffic systems not simply start from scratch with a purpose-built set of signals? The answer, as is often the case in history, comes down to who was managing the problem and what knowledge they already had. The first traffic signals installed on public roads were not designed by road engineers or motor vehicle specialists. They were designed by people whose entire professional formation was in railway operations and signaling. When the city of Cleveland installed the first electric traffic light in 1914, and when the first four-way electric signals appeared in Detroit shortly afterward, the engineers responsible reached for the system they knew. The railway sequence was already standardized, already understood by the general public through decades of exposure at level crossings and station approaches, and already encoded in the early driving regulations that treated level crossings as the primary point of interaction between vehicles and signals. Choosing different colors for road signals would have required public re-education and introduced a period of dangerous confusion. Adopting the railway colors meant that anyone who had ever stood near a train track already understood the system intuitively. The amber light deserves its own moment here because its role is more interesting than it first appears. It does not simply mean slow down, which is the instruction most drivers follow. In the original railway system, it meant the line ahead is occupied. Proceed, but be prepared to stop, because something is blocking your path. Translated to road junctions, it became a transition signal, a brief acknowledgement that the system is changing state, and that the junction is in a moment of negotiation between one set of movements ending and another beginning. The amber phase is not padding. It is the interval during which the physics of stopping from speed is given its due. So, the next time you sit at a red light and watch the sequence run, you are watching a Victorian railway safety system, revised after a fatal collision in a Cambridgeshire field, operated by a technology that would have been unimaginable to the engineers who designed it, still performing its original function on roads that did not exist when the colors were chosen. Red because the dye was durable. Amber because a driver misread a white light in an ice storm. Green because the alternative caused accidents. The sequence was never designed for you. It was designed for a locomotive driver squinting at a lantern in the dark, and it turned out to work well enough for everything that came after.